Welcome back to the podcast. I have a really special treat for you today. As it's 11 years this week, I decided to share with you my trip to the eternal city, Rome. We're going to be exploring the language, the history, the food, and the culture that this amazing city has to offer. So grab your headphones, sit back, and let's travel back in time together. The story starts the year after we graduated university, and I decided to book a special surprise trip to Rome for a couple of days for my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. Her birthday is in January, and I booked it in around September, so I had a couple of months to prepare, get everything organised, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's also where my language learning journey began, which I've mentioned probably a couple of times in different videos. I basically decided that I wanted to show off a little. We were still in that stage where I thought maybe that sort of thing would impress her. So I decided to learn a little bit of Italian so that when we were there, I could maybe order a little bit of food or something. I tried learning languages on and off different times, like at university and at school, and I'd never really had much success, so I wasn't really holding out that much hope for a sudden revolution in language learning that I would suddenly be able to do it. But I just thought, even if I can just learn how to say like, hi, how are you, and a couple of useful phrases, I thought that'd be pretty cool. I did it by finding an audio course, and basically while I was driving to and from work, which was an hour each way, I would listen to the episodes, basically just repeat everything out loud and just do as many of them as I could. While I was doing this, I actually started to develop my language learning strategy, if you like, where I would actually test myself that if I wasn't able to replicate the phrases they asked me to do in each episode, because they provided you with a conversation and then taught you the vocabulary and then asked you, how do you say this? How do you say this? To make you generate the conversation yourself. If I wasn't able to do that confidently, then I would actually repeat that particular episode or part of the course. So it really reinforced it and I made sure I understood it. And actually I realised it was really fun, and I learned a lot more than I was expecting, especially with only a couple of months. I wasn't really expecting to learn a huge amount. I wasn't an amazing speaker by any means, but I was actually able to have some basic conversations. I understood some simple stuff, so that was really nice. Then we did this. It was a really crazy trip because we decided to go from Stansted because it was a little bit cheaper. And when I say we, I mean me, because I booked it. Where we live now, it's probably about 2 to 3 hours away from us. So I decided to drive all the way down there because it would save us some money on flights, and I was still poor just out of university. And so we had that long trip down there and we flew to Rome, and when we arrived there was a bus transfer because we used Ryanair, and anyone who has used Ryanair will be very familiar with this situation, that the airport is never actually close to the city you're visiting. It always is really far away. So we had like a bus transfer, and I remember sitting down on the bus behind this old couple. I could hear them speaking, and that was the first time I really realised actually I was able to understand quite a lot of what they were actually saying. They were talking about what they're going to have for dinner and maybe that they need to do some shopping and stuff like that. So that was really, I think, the turning point where I realised actually language learning was possible, and which has led me to this point today. But I really also want to focus on the trip itself because it was really fantastic. We stayed in a little hotel or bed and breakfast, I can't really remember. I know we had breakfast included, but whether that makes it a bed and breakfast, can't really remember. It was a special deal that I found, so it was actually a really nice one. It had a really nice comfortable bed, which is always what I look for in a hotel. And we were staying just south of the centre. It was about a 15-20 minute walk from where we were staying to the Colosseum, which is in the south of the sort of central area with all the historic landmarks and all of that kind of stuff. I picked that so that we could walk in if we wanted to. It was also close to the metro station if we wanted to get the metro to different parts of the city, because at that point I didn't really have any idea of how big the centre of Rome actually was. Even from the guidebook that I had and the different routes that I'd looked at and stuff like that, I didn't really know that. So I thought, stay close to a metro, a bit like I would normally do in London or something like that. Then if you are far away, you can actually just get the metro home. I was about to say tube, but we only call it the tube in London. And also then if you're tired at the end of the day, you can just jump on the metro and get straight back to your hotel room, which is always pretty handy. This was really the first trip that I was able to really plan in a fun way. I was able to sit and look through the guidebook and read all about all the different stuff. And I wanted to be kind of like our own personal tour guide, because we don't really enjoy doing organized tours ourselves. We like just kind of exploring and having a look around. And I thought if I knew where stuff was and had a bit of an idea of the layout of the city and the different landmarks we wanted to visit, it would make the trip much more enjoyable, because we were only staying for either 2 or 3 days. So it was quite a short trip. I remember when we arrived, we went straight to some of the attractions because it was so limited. I think we went to the Spanish Steps, and then we walked through to like the Trevi Fountain and some other places like that. And I can't remember where else we went actually, but I remember we literally got straight off the bus and went straight to start seeing stuff. And we were confronted with the standard tourist traps where they try and give you the little bracelets to, mark you as a tourist, which obviously I'd heard about, so we didn't do any of that. But it's always a bit annoying that they're always in the really popular tourist places, so there's always that sort of sour taste when you see those guys coming up and sort of bothering you. But maybe it's also because I don't like being bothered by people in general, so I'm a bit more averse to that, let's say. I would say the best part of the trip was really just walking around the city. We went to, for example, the Colosseum, and we just went in ourselves and we had a little look around at the different bits and pieces. We didn't buy the audio tour because, again, we wanted to just have a look. We weren't really bothered about really going too heavily into the history. And I had my little guidebook and I was looking through that as we were going around. And then close to the Colosseum, there's also like Palatine Hill and the other places like right around there. And you can basically walk from there to all of the other things like the Pantheon, I think, I got the name correct, and all that other stuff. So we basically just walked through the centre on the first day where we had a full day. We did the Colosseum and all the big stuff. And then we went to one of the big famous squares. I can't remember exactly what the name is. And we went to a restaurant very close to that. So it was actually quite expensive. At the time, I didn't really understand how Italian restaurants worked. For the uninitiated, they have this structure of different types of restaurants, which is very different to lots of other places. They have, for example, what they call a bar, which is basically somewhere in between a British bar where they serve alcohol, a cafe where they serve coffee and snacks. It changes throughout the day. So in the morning they go there for maybe coffee and breakfast and a croissant or something like that. At lunchtime they sell sandwiches and little snacks and then maybe coffees or a drink. In the afternoon they sell alcohol and snacks, and then in the evening you can go for like an aperitif and stuff like that. So basically it's like a social meeting point for drinks and food throughout the day, but it actually changes, which we don't really have here in England. And then they have what they call trattoria or osteria, and they are kind of like family-run, small, local restaurants. Very traditional ones actually don't even have a fixed menu. They just have like a chalkboard on the wall which says today and what they're going to be serving. And usually it's like a nonna out the back who's cooking some family recipe or something like that. Some of them are a little bit different, but we did actually manage to find some of those in Rome as well later, just by chance because we were walking around and just saw somewhere that looked pretty good. And then a restaurant usually is a bit more expensive, especially around tourist areas. They are generally made for tourists. They generally seem to serve a lot of different varieties of dishes, not just specifically from that region or that city, but all over Italy and also other places as well. The place we went, actually, we had a big antipasti platter with lots of meat and vegetables and stuff like that. And then we both had some pasta, if I remember. I think I had a seafood spaghetti and my wife had, I think, like a ragu with some type of pasta. I can't remember exactly, but I do remember that they came in these copper pans. So the pan that they cooked it in, they actually brought it to the table, which I thought was really cool at the time. Yeah, it was actually a really, really nice meal. The quality of the food was actually surprisingly good, even for a tourist area. So we were really happy. And that was my wife's big birthday celebration meal. So it was really, really nice and we had a great time. I think we had a couple of beers or some drinks, but it was just fantastic. And especially after walking around all the places during the day. And as we're walking, one of the things that we really love to do is just pick up food on the go. So generally we'll have breakfast at the hotel, and then in the evening we'll either pick up some food from a shop or a supermarket or like a takeaway place and then go back to the hotel or go to a restaurant. But in the day, we basically just pick up stuff that we find along the way. So we go to a cafe and get some like cake or something. In this case, actually, when we finished with the lots of the historic places right around the Colosseum, there was a gelato place on the corner, and we went there, which was really, really cool. Talking about that corner, so I don't remember the name of the building. I'll try and put a picture and so you know what I'm talking about. But behind Palatine Hill, there's this really big, white, majestic building. I think it's a government building in Rome. I'm not actually really sure. But there's a huge roundabout just in front of it, and there's a really big selection or crossroads, if you like, with I think 4 or 5 lanes. It's really, really huge. And we were standing there and we were taking some nice pictures, and then we just heard a crash, and I think there were 2 cars and a scooter that had somehow all collided, and then there were loads of people shouting and stuff, which was, yeah, quite crazy. But obviously, if you know anything about Italian driving, the stereotypes from my personal experience are actually quite true. So yeah, it's as chaotic as it probably sounds. Then we crossed over and we got some gelato, which obviously is amazing. The best way I can describe it, and this is what I often tell lots of my Italian students and my Italian friends, that maybe that gelato is not actually like the best, but even just the average gelato in Rome is better than basically nearly everything you can get in the UK, unless you can find a really authentic place. It's the same as pizza. An average pizza in Italy is just way better than the majority of pizzas in the UK. So it's just great. And we walked around and we got loads of different food as we were exploring. The second day was a Sunday, and I remember that specifically because the final Sunday of every month, the Vatican Museum is free, and we basically decided that we would go there on the Sunday. We're not really massively into galleries and museums when we travel, but because it's got the picture with the pointing, which I can't remember the name of at the moment, it's something we wanted to see, and we just thought it'd be something really cool to do. We didn't actually go into the Vatican and the Basilica because it was just so busy. Even in January, it was really crazy. So we just had a look and took some pictures, but then we went to the Vatican Museum. But when we did that, on the Sunday, for some reason, there was like maintenance work with the metro. So we ended up walking all the way from where we were staying to the Colosseum, and then along the river all the way around the eastern part of the city, if I remember the geography correctly. We went all the way around the river and then up to the Vatican, which is in the sort of northeast. And it was really funny because that day I really realised how British we were, because we were walking around in January. I had like a light jacket or a jumper, and my wife had like a thin coat, and all the Italians were there in thick winter coats and hats and gloves and scarves. But it was about 10 or 15 degrees, something like that. So it's like a British spring, but obviously for Italians it's much, much colder. So they could definitely tell we were tourists just by what we were wearing, I think. As we were walking along, it was really nice. We walked along the river, we took our time, the weather was really good and it was sunny. And I remember specifically that we were stopped by a group of tourists, other tourists, I think Italians that were visiting the city, and they actually asked me for directions. And I was so nervous because I wasn't really used to speaking Italian then. I understood what they wanted, but I just couldn't figure out how to say it. And in the end, I basically just said, oh, I'm a tourist, I don't know. And that was one of the memories that's really stuck with me about how I really want to feel more comfortable speaking, and that actually pushed me to develop my Italian even more, which I think is really, really great. Also, talking about my Italian, when we were there, I think for the first day I didn't even speak Italian when we got to the hotel because I was so worried about making sure that I checked in correctly and I understood everything, that I spoke in English and they spoke back to me in English. Whereas now, I know from experience, actually, as soon as you arrive, you just want to use every opportunity to speak the language. So even if my language skills weren't that good, I would still use the language. But that's all just part of the learning process. Over the last 11 years, I've learned quite a bit about language learning, especially now I'm a teacher. So we went to the Vatican Museum and it was really busy. Obviously it's free, so everyone goes on that day, but it was great, and there were lots and lots of people, but we had a really good look around and there was some really cool stuff. We may have taken some cheeky photos of the famous painting, which according to all of the signs and the security guards, you're not allowed to do. But, it's 11 years ago, what are they going to do now? So we did, and everyone did, to be honest. But at one point, one of the guys started coming over and being like, put your phone away, and so we quickly left. Then afterwards, we found a little, I think they call them like a hot table is the translation. It was basically where they have like a heated section and they have loads of pre-prepared food. So they had like pasta in trays and some pizza you could buy by the slice and some arancini. They're not actually arancini. The ones in Rome, I believe they've got a different name, and they're not like the Sicilian arancini, but they're basically the same kind of thing where it's like a sticky rice ball with cheese and tomato and stuff like that. So again, we picked up that little snack, and we also had like a cake and a coffee a little bit later when we were exploring the city, and we went back and visited some of the other places we hadn't seen and stuff like that, which was really amazing. And we were really lucky even in January that the weather was really, really good. It was only on the final day, which was the Monday, we were flying on Monday afternoon, and so we had the morning just to kind of explore a little bit. And that was the only day it was raining, and we didn't really want to be walking around in the open too much. So we found a little restaurant, which is one of these trattoria osteria places, and they basically had like 2 or 3 items. I had this meatball and rice dish, which had like some salad and a sauce, which actually was really, really good. And then my wife had lasagna because it was, something that we knew, and she wasn't feeling particularly great on that day. So she wanted to have something that was filling and nice and would keep us going. And then the drama at the airport started. So after days of absorbing all the culture, all the amazing food, the beautiful city, we got to the airport early because we always like to be there early, and my wife really hates waiting and being late and stuff like that. So we got there early, and we saw, as we were going to the security, we saw some restaurants, and we thought, right, we're just going to go straight through, get through security, and then we can find some food on the other side, and then we've got loads of time to wait and we don't have to worry about it. What a terrible decision. We got through security and there was nothing. Because it was a tiny little airport, they literally had like a newsagent, so a little shop that sold books and newspapers and stuff like that. There was a little fast food place where they had some cold chips and just terrible paninis. And that was literally it. And we were there, I don't know, like 4 hours early or something. And I think the flight was actually delayed a little bit. And it was terrible. Yeah, that wait in the airport was really, really bad. And that's one of the reasons why we have a rule now that is, if we see a restaurant or a place when we're hungry or we need food, we don't wait, we go to that place, get the food, because actually if you go through security or you go to another area, you don't know you're actually going to find what you need. So it's better to have something average now, and then you can also get something again later, rather than being stuck in a tiny little area of an airport with no food, which obviously isn't ideal. Then basically, because of the times that we flew and I think the little delay and stuff like that, we got back at about midnight, I believe. And like I mentioned before, we were about 2 or 3 hours away. And I'd been up since like 6 a.m. because we wanted to make the most of the day. We were getting up really, really early. That drive was one of the most difficult drives that I have ever done. It was horrendous. It was absolutely chucking it down. It was so wet and so windy, and at the time I had a little Ford Fiesta, a tiny little car, and the wind was like blowing it from side to side, so I had to really make sure I kept the car straight. The windscreen wipers were going crazy on the front, going absolutely nuts to try and keep it clear enough for me to actually see where I was going. And I was so exhausted, I had to keep opening the window to just get a burst of fresh air just to sort of keep me alert and stuff like that. Obviously, not exactly the best thing to be doing, but I really needed to get home, and I think we were working the next day, or we needed to just get back basically. So my wife was actually falling asleep, and then every time I opened the window I just heard a kind of jolt because she woke up because a burst of cold air hit her in the face as well, which obviously wasn't the most fun drive. But yeah, definitely whenever we would do that kind of drive again, if we were flying at that time, we would just stay in a hotel and then drive the next day. But you learn these things, especially when you're young, you're like 22, you're like, yeah, I can do that stuff. I can not sleep and drive for 3 hours, 200 miles or whatever. Now, I'm a little bit more realistic and I know my limits, let's say. All in all, it was the most incredible trip. We were only there for a couple of days and I'd absolutely love to go back. And especially now that I can actually speak Italian, we'd be able to see even more and do even more. But it was really what sparked my love for languages and for Italy, and we just had an incredible time, and it was really our first big traveling experience together and what basically made us keep going and doing loads of other stuff. And that's a wrap. I hope you've enjoyed my little journey through time from 11 years ago in the big eternal city. Whether you've been able to visit Rome before or it's on your bucket list, I hope some of this information in this story has been interesting and maybe will give you the inspiration to go and visit it yourself. So until next time, happy English learning and safe travels.